What's up, y'all? Jesse Warden here. Gonna take a break from our regularly scheduled programming of teaching you programming. What I wanted to talk about was the emotional side, or spiritual side, depending on how you look at it. There are a lot of people who project software as this thing that anyone can learn, that it is a skill like any other skill. There is a significant amount of resources, recent desire, and a lot of people out there. Thus, it should be an attainable goal, a worthwhile goal to strive for from an employment perspective and a skill set perspective. And thus, there is no reason why you can't succeed beyond your own ability to work hard. I think that's not fair. So there's a couple things I wanted to cover today. Talk about what I think is misleading things about trying to learn software and how it's really harder than people make it out to be, and it can be very frustrating. And number two is really describe some of the good news that will come about it. So if you've been trying to learn software is hard. Software is really hard. And anybody who says otherwise is lying to you, or they are projecting their own inequalities that they think it's simple because they're put on projects that are simple. Whatever it is, software is a very, very challenging thing. There's a lot of quotes that are thrown around that the industry is kind of just accepted as fact. It doesn't mean they are fact. It doesn't mean there's science backing it up. But the thoughts are that 8 out of 10 software projects fail, and 9 out of 10 are perceived as failures. And the reason I think a lot of it's been on that is that when we look at the software that we create, sometimes, if we're creating it for customers or consumers, they may like it, but we could hate it. Even if it is successful, we could perceive it as our personal failures. So software is really hard. There's a lot of challenges doing software. A lot of the reason things like consulting and what I do and others exist is because software is so hard. People need help of the experts, either bail them out or make sure that they put overqualified resources on project to significantly mitigate risk that they perceive, on that particular project. You can put in a lot of hard work, a lot of years of research. You can have really successful developers, a team of successful designers, developers, leadership, whatever else, and you can still have failure. It happens all the time, so don't let people say otherwise. Now that you know software's hard, the good news from that is that it's definitely something we're striving for. If it's worth doing, it's gotta be challenging, it's gotta be hard. We do it because it's hard, like JFK said about the moon. Programming itself is very frustrating. If you see a lot of other people saying, I love to code, programming is my life, I love programming. Programming can be a very, very frustrating endeavor. You're put upon in very pressure situations where a lot of time what you do is a very engineering, mathematical, intimidating skill set. And other people may not have a good understanding of what it is you really do here, right? They don't know. And it's difficult to articulate sometimes, right? What you're actually doing. When your parents ask, so what is it you do? You just sit in front of a keyboard and type in a bunch of words in Notepad? It's like, nah, mom, it's like digital Legos. Like, you know what I'm saying? No, I don't know what you're saying. It's difficult to communicate. Programming from that perspective is very frustrating in that trying to communicate to others what you do, if your priority pyramid to have some form of acceptance or, support or whatever, programming is frustrating. The other part of programming being frustrating is that when you code things, it doesn't work and you don't know why. You become angry at yourself or at the computer or whatever else. And this frustration is like a daily thing. Sometimes you have days, weeks, months that things actually go quite well. You have good tools, you're using good APIs, you're in a very constructive environment, you have a very good schedule down, you have good firm requirements, you understand, what you should be doing, you understand what success is, you understand what you build, how it'll align with what your client, customer, or users actually want. The stars align and you have some good days. When anything of those get out of whack, it can be a little frustrating, a little stressful. Yes, a lot of us like to promote how awesome coding is. We feel so lucky to be in a world, in a time of history where we're allowed to get our hands dirty doing raw things with computers. Eventually this will go away. They'll write themselves and we won't even have need for software. But now is the time, and we're living in it, and we feel very blessed and happy about that. That doesn't mean that it doesn't drive us up the wall. It doesn't drive us crazy. So yes, programming is very frustrating. And when you are learning, it is extra frustrating because you don't know what you don't know. And the more you do, you learn more, but you keep leaving a trail of frustration behind you. Depending upon your perspective, you can look at those long, things of sample projects you've created or tests you've taken or even projects that you've done and get very frustrated. Like this is my career for the past few years. This is what I'm capable of. And if you look at it that way, it's a wrong way to look at it. You got to understand that it's mathematically proven that the more failures you have, the more competent you are. Obviously with things like writers and stuff, there's a lot of subjective and qualitative reasons as to why somebody who has like 2 books, both are successful, seems to me more of a famous or better writer than someone who's written 5 books that are famous but he has like 30 failures. Doesn't seem right, but mathematically we've shown in a variety of disciplines that's how it works. The more failures, the more tries, the more attempts, the way you failed something, you learn from it and you change your approach, that builds upon itself over time from a programming perspective. Programming can be very frustrating when you look at that long trail and go, am I really improving? Am I making any progress? I've watched Jesse's videos, I've read online, I've looked at blogs, I've read the books, I've tried, sample projects, I've rewritten the same thing 5 times, and I'm really frustrated. I don't know if I'm improving. Programming is frustrating. Programming in general, what we do is very, very frustrating. So when people say it's all happy cherries and la 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 and magic and rainbows, it's not. It's a challenge. That's why we like it. We like to be challenged. It's just a mindset. The other big stressor about programming is the programmer's dichotomy. It spawns all kinds of nasty emotions and nasty chemical reactions from your body, from cortisol to fight-flight response with adrenaline release. And that is the programmer's dichotomy of hitting the deadline, whatever that is, deadline of a certain date, a certain time frame for a set of features within a certain time frame, versus creating technical debt or doing it right or doing what's best for the user, right? Everything that the engineer perceives as good versus the business sees as good. And that is a balance. People like 37 Signals and Apple have environments where they have really smart people and they have the, kind of what I was talking about before, all the stars aligned to allow those things normally to happen. Painted a pretty picture as if it's perfect. We're constantly thrown in situations where we have to balance that. If you've gone either way 100%, the challenges of that. So for example, if you constantly strive for the deadline, you're going to create code that's unmanageable. It's going to be very difficult to work with. If somebody wants to change, you're going to get really emotionally drained and frustrated and say, I don't want to touch that code. It's so messed up and spaghetti. I did what you told me to do. You said success was delivering by this deadline. I delivered. Now I'm being punished by having to go back in that mess that you forced me to create, right? So then I'm going to learn from that and I'm going to push back harder on deadlines now because I want to make sure I create code better. But some situations, if you don't deliver by a specific date, doesn't matter how good the code is, you don't get paid. The client doesn't launch. The users need it by X date. So it's worthless. So even if it's good code, it's still worthless. Nobody gets paid. Both are reality. Both are important. And trying to balance that is a very challenging skill throughout your entire career. Understand that that doesn't go away. So I have 4 bad things I'm telling you. 3 of them have positive outlooks. That is the one that never gets better. Your skills get better. But balancing that, how do I build it right as an engineer versus how do I do what's best for the business? That is, why we're paid lots of money to figure that out, right? That's really hard. And you do get better at it, and it gets a little, different, but each situation is different. Each business is different depending upon what, industry you're in. Communication problem. This is the last one. Communicating as an engineer, what's going on? Where are we at? When is it going to be done? What problems are you running into? Why can't you just... Why is the user doing that? What did we do wrong? Why is this thing not working? I've deployed it 5 times. Stack Overflow has nothing. Google has nothing. What is going on? Why did you code it like that 6 months ago? Do you even remember? Communication is how you work with other people. People seem to think software is the programmer, that's you, and the computer, and you code it, and that's your life. But software is about people. People use software. We're not creating software for computers to use. We're creating software for people to use. And the process of creating that involves a lot of people. The way people operate together is communication. Communication is a flawed process. Now, I'm not going to go over why. I've already written about this in the past, and so have many PhDs and doctors. There's a lot of filters that when I communicate to you, it goes through a lot of filters and we misinterpret the message. That's why when you were a kid and used to play the game of telephone, the message would get totally warped. That happens all the time. That's just an exasperated example of it. Understand that communication is very challenging when you're first starting out. If you want to communicate where you're at, that assumes that you're a good programmer, you understand what you've written, what you haven't written, how it works, what the problems are. Your experience will tell you generally how long something will take, what risks are involved, how you'll probably mitigate those risks, what you'll do at what time to communicate those risks, and how the suggestions you make may or may not get approved by those that you're working with from a client perspective. Being able to articulate that in a set of options that you believe will be able to be sold to the client within a given time frame, budget, resources that you have in your team, etc., right, that you've adapted. If you don't know all that, it's very difficult to communicate where you at. When are you going to be done? What are the problems and when are they going to get resolved? I don't even know the problems. I haven't found the problem. It doesn't work, right? So communication, when you first start out as a programmer, is very hard to do. You're dealing with a lot of people who are, and I mean, this is stereotypical, but it's just, what we use. You're dealing with, right brain people, very creative. And here you are in the left brain trying to think from a mathematical perspective. And you're not really sure how to get them to understand the insane cognitive load of this matrix of how things, work with solution paths and say, all right, this is what I'm thinking. This is what's going on right now. Can you interpret this? No, they can't. So you have to condense that down into something. Trying to do that with, okay, I've written tons of code. I've checked it into the source control. The source control build system isn't working. So it inhibits my ability to effectively deliver code on a reasonable time frame. I have no unit test, so I don't know when things are broken. When I contribute code to it, I have no indication if I'm adding value or removing value or breaking existing things. Therefore, it's very difficult for me to project to you when a deadline is. So here are the following options that we can do to help solve that problem. I couldn't have said that in 2003. Now I say it all the time when people are like, what's going on? How do we fix it? I can make that up on the fly. That's all the bad news. Here's the good news. Number one, it gets better. You learn to love your code. After 5 years, 10,000 hours, whatever theory you subscribe to, I believe that one. After 5 long, hard years of working every day, 14-hour days, and it wasn't always my job. It was on my own, right? Reading, researching, playing, trying things, having fun, attending conferences, reading blogs, reading books, trying techniques out on my own time. That kind of stuff eventually leads to you becoming basically a master of your craft. Now, programming always changes. You're always going to continue learning, but you will reach a point where you like what you create. You'll create code, come back 6 months from now and go, I don't hate that. You will enjoy your code. And a lot of people seem to think that that never goes away, and that's not true at all. There's a lot of programmers who, as you learn, you do hate your code because of the things out of your control. A hard, insane, unreasonable deadline, really bad tooling, a slow computer, just an annoying language you're forced to use or a platform. All those things aside, you'll eventually develop a skill set that is transferable between languages and platforms that you will like your code. Promise, it's going to come. You just got to put in the hard work. It may take less for some of you who are smarter or lucky. It may take longer for those of you who have bad platforms or just bad circumstances. But I promise you, if you work hard, you'll get there. I got there. I know others who've got there. It's totally worth it because then you have a brand new set of challenges that allow you to grow as a person. So it's worth it. But again, you never stop learning. So that's the good news. Programming is frustrating, but you get better at learning. You get better at adapting. You get better at consuming new knowledge, new technologies. You get faster at it. So for example, if you learn, like let's say a brand new programming language, you're watching my videos, you're learning JavaScript, you've never coded before. Your next job, they're like, all right, well now we need to do on a server a completely different language. The speed at which it takes you to do that is significantly reduced. You already know how to code. You already know what functions are. You already know what classes and OOP and continuous integration and IDEs and compiling and testing and debugging and blah, blah, blah. You don't have to relearn all that. You just adapt that to that particular language or platform. So suddenly at this point, you're just memorizing an API and getting comfortable with the tooling. It really is that simple. Now that could take months, that could take a year, but I guarantee you to get up and running in a year versus a noob, which takes, decades, it could take even less. It just depends on, how much have you actually played with that language in your spare time, right? So a lot of these things go away. So you don't have to worry about it. It is worth it. It does pay off in mad dividends. And anybody who recognizes engineering as a discipline will know that about you. And suddenly, regardless of if you're getting a new job in a completely different language, the people who matter will recognize that skill set. So it pays off from that economic perspective as well, okay? And lastly, communication. It does get easier. The better you get at software, the better you get at articulating it to other people. Part of me writing blog posts and doing these videos is for me to learn. If I can't describe to you something in a tweet-sized chunk of words, then I must not understand it well enough to articulate it effectively, right? Therefore, I have to keep learning until I can condense what takes me a page to describe down to a tweet, right? So if I can do it in about 2 sentences, I must know it well enough. When you know software, when you know OOP, when you know MVC, when you know design patterns, when you know IDEs, when you know programming and streams and messaging systems and debugging and all that stuff for a particular platform or multiple platforms, client and server, infrastructure, hardware, whatever else, it becomes much easier for you to tailor the message of what you're trying to answer from a question perspective to whoever's asking. So if a consumer asks, you'll know to make it simpler for, convert it to a language that they'll understand, right? You parse it, right, to a format or a DTO that they get. If a manager asks you when things are done, you can take a step back and realize that you don't have to freak out. You need to breathe, give them something effective so they can take it up the chain or to the client to help effectively communicate it. So if you empower them well, they'll leave you alone. You learn all these little networks of how communication works, as well as your ability to put in what you think is good quality communication, right? So if you understand programming, you can effectively communicate with designers better. You can effectively communicate with the hardware guys better. You can talk to other programmers better. You understand why they're asking certain questions, right? When they start asking you about your API, it's probably because they want to change something, but they're nervous, or maybe that's their personality type. Whatever it is, the better you get, the easier it gets with communication, not just from practicing talking and communicating with various different stakeholders, but as you get a better coder, that actually pays off in your ability to effectively say, what's going on? When somebody asks. Good news there. So that's it. I just wanted to bring up the 4 bad news things of software is hard. What do we do? Well, it gets easier. Programming is very frustrating, but eventually that frustration goes away. You still have frustrations from bugs and everything else, but it gets a ton easier. The better you get, the more fun it gets. It's a continually positive path, and it opens new challenges. Just like science, we answer some questions, which creates many more questions. Programming is the same way, but it's more fun, more opportunities, right? So it is worth continuing the path. It feels like an uphill battle, but it's an uphill battle to awesomeness. When you get to the top, you can look back and see a great view. Number 3 is the programmer dichotomy. This is the only thing that doesn't go away, but you get better at it. And that is trying to balance, creating bad software, managing technical debt, right? With creating business value, getting on the deadline. That never goes away, but you do get slightly better at it. So just be aware that that's a fact of life. Call the ambulance. And number 4, the communication problem. Trying to effectively communicate to members of your team about concepts that you're just now struggling to grasp and you're not sure if you should be doing that and you're very insecure about it, that gets a lot better. You get very confident in yourself. As you're confident in yourself, your assertive communication skills go up, right? And practice makes perfect. I just want to let you know, all this negativity stuff that people say, it does get better. You'll get better. So keep putting in the hard work. Pays off. All right, and that's your positive message for the week. And again, my name is Jesse Warden. If you've got any other questions about some of the softer side things of programming, dealing with humans, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, email. You can hit me up on Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, whatever. Don't forget to subscribe. Keep at it. Keep doing the hard work.